Sech the Shabbos Perik Dalet Mishnah Aleph. Bamet Taimnin and Bamet Ein Taimnin. The Chachamim answered keeping food hot for Shabbos by completely surrounding a pot with any substance that adds heat. This is also even if it's done on Erev Shabbos, as we mentioned at the end of the second parak and discussed in the third parak. If the pot is then left insulated on Shabbos, if it were mutter to surround food with a substance that adds heat, this might lead people to bury their pots in hot ashes containing glowing embers. Gecholim. This in turn is also because one might be chaysev gecholim by mix the embers in order to make them hotter, and thereby being over on the malacha of mavir, lighting a fire. It's mutter to insulate a pot of food before Shabbos if the substance being used to insulate the pot only preserves the food's heat but doesn't make it hotter. The Mishnah is going to discuss which materials may be used and which ones may not be used. Bamet Taimnin, with what materials may we surround a pot of food on Erev Shabbos to insulate and keep it warm for Shabbos? Bamet Ein Taimnin, and with what materials may we not surround the pot? Which materials add heat and are therefore forbidden, which merely maintain the food heat and are therefore mutter? Ein Taimnin le begefes v'le bezevel. We will not surround pots with olive or sesame pulp, because when these substances get packed together, it becomes extremely hot. Or with manure, because it also generates a lot of heat. Le bemelach v'le besid v'le bechoil. We will not surround the pot with salt, with lime, or with sand, because these substances all add heat, ben lachim ben yeveshim. Whether these substances are moist or dry, because they add heat even when they are dry. Although these substances generate more heat when they are moist, nevertheless, even when dry, they add some heat to the food and therefore may not be used. Lo beteven v'lo bezagim. You may not use straw or grape skins. The zagim is a machlekes in the Gemara if zagim are the shells or the pits. But either way, you can't use that. You can't use soft, unprocessed material, such as strips of wool or pieces of worn clothing, or with grass, when these substances are moist. But you may surround the food with these substances when they are dry, because these substances add heat only when they are moist. The Mishnah asks us being taimin food with these substances only if they will retain some of the original natural moisture. The substance dried off and then became moist again, it may still be used for insulating food. Even pieces of wool or worn clothing may be naturally moist if they come from an area of the animal's body that absorbs a great deal of perspiration. Such fabric is heavy with lanolin, which is a natural oil found in wool. Wool from these areas can sometimes remain moist even after it's been woven into a garment. Taimnin b'ksus u'beperis. You may use clothing or fruit or produce such as grain or beans that are small enough to be used to insulate food, to do hatmana, as well as with pigeon feathers or any other types of pigeon feathers. The reason why the Mishnah singles out pigeon feathers as opposed to any other feathers is because pigeon feathers were of common use in those days. Naseris shal charashim is sawdust, ubina'irish shal pishtan daka, or with fine flax combings. These splinters that fall from the flax as it's combed out do not add any heat. Rabbi Yehuda oiser bedako mater bagasa. Rabbi Yehuda asks surrounding a pot with fine flax to do hatmana with, because they produce some heat, and permits only the big ones, the coarse ones, because the coarse ones will not add heat. Masha ein kain the small ones. Who's the halacha like? Ve'ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda. Mishnah base. Taimnin b'shlachin. You may use animal hides because they do not add heat. Shlachin, we're not referring to leather, we're referring to unprocessed hides that still have hair or wool on them. This hair or wool allows the skin to serve as insulators that preserve heat. And you may move these hides on Shabbos, because even hides that were not used to insulate food are not muksa, since they can be used as rugs for sitting on. In ancient times, it was customary to sit on rugs on the floor. Animal hides can be used as rugs. Even though their primary use is to be processed into leather, they're not muksa, because sometimes, even before they were processed, they were used as leather. Begizei tzemer, you may surround the pot, you may do hatmana with wool shearings that are no longer naturally moist. Ve'ein metaltlin aisan, however, it's also to move them even if they were used to insulate food, because the primary use is to be spun into thread and then woven into clothes, which is not mutter on Shabbos. So what should one do if he surrounded his pot, if he did do a hatmana with wool shearings, with gizei tzemer before Shabbos? How could he open his pot without moving the wool that's piled up on top of it? Says the Mishnah, he should remove the lid of the pot that's covered with the wool shearings, And the wood shearings will fall off on their own. Since he's not moving the shearings directly, this is mutter. The Mishnah speaks of a case where the lid or the handle of the pot can be reached without having to move the wool. Instead of lifting the wool from on top of the pot, you should simply lift and remove the lid and let the wool shearings fall away. It's mutter to move something that's not muktzah, even if doing so will cause a muktzah item to be moved. If one does this for the sake of something that's being mutter. In Perek Yud Zayin, we'll learn that in certain cases, if a muktzah item is placed on a non-muktzah item before Shabbos, it's also to move even the non-muktzah item on Shabbos, if it receives the status of the muktzah item that it supports. This halacha does not apply to the lid of a pot that is supporting muktzah gizei tzemer, which are muktzah. However, because the gizei tzemer are there because of the pot, and for the pot they serve a purpose, they are tafel to the pot because they serve a purpose for the pot. Therefore, the lid is not secondary to the gizei tzemer and does not become muktzah because of them. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says kupa. If one wants to remove a pot of food from the box in which it's surrounded with the gizei tzemer, mata al tzidav and noitel, he should tilt the box containing the tzemer and the pot on its side and then remove the pot. That way, all the shearings will slide onto one side, and when he wishes to replace the pot, he can place it in the area of the box that's empty of the wool. Then when the box is once again stood upright, the shearings will fall around the box. He may not, however, remove the pot from the box without tilting the box. Why? Because we're concerned that he may take the pot out of the box and then be unable to return it because the shearings will fall into the hole that remained when the pot was removed. If that happens, you might forget and move the shearings out of the way in order to put back the pot, violating the Isser of Muktzah. It's therefore also to remove the pot from the box in the first place, unless he tilts the box first. The Chachamim say it's no problem. You may take the pot out without tilting the box at all, and then replace it in the box as long as the wool shearings don't fall into the place where the pot was. The Chachamim are not concerned that if this is mutter, he might be tempted to move the gizei tzemer if they fell into the hole. Now, what's the halacha with doing hatamana on Shabbos itself? If a person didn't get a chance to cover the pot when it was still day on Erev Shabbos, he may not cover it once night has fallen on Shabbos, even with a substance that does not add heat. Meaning, once Shabbos comes, it's not mutter to do hatamana anymore. This is because we're concerned that if it was mutter to wrap hot food on Shabbos to preserve its heat, a person might notice that the pot he's about to wrap has cooled off, and he might then reheat it before wrapping it. So he wants to make sure that it's going to be nice and warm, so he'll do that first, which is asur kisov in his gala, mutter l'chasoisei. If one covered the pot before Shabbos with the substance that does not add heat, but only preserves it, and the pot then became uncovered on Shabbos, it's mutter to cover it again with the heat-preserving substance, meaning it's mutter to do hatamana after nightfall, since it was already covered when Shabbos began. Although the Mishnah here states only that one is mutter to re-wrap the pot if it became uncovered, one is allowed to deliberately uncover the pot on Shabbos to remove the food and then re-wrap the pot to keep the remaining food warm. One may fill a bottle with cold water and place it under a pillow or a cushion on Shabbos in order to take away its chill, in order to warm up the water. Although it's also to wrap hot food in any substance on Shabbos, wrapping cold food is mutter, since this is not the normal way of doing hatamana. Ad kan Perek Dalet.